Have you ever struggled with your toss? Where to put it? How high? Should it be to the left or to the right? 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 11 o'clock? What about the tossing action? How should you hold the ball? How much should you turn your shoulders? These types of things. I want to share with you my insight into the pro service toss. I'll share with you the mechanics, important details, and some secrets that I've learned in all my years of tennis. Stay tuned. Hi, it's Chris Lewit, top American junior coach and coach to many #1 juniors in the United States. I'm excited to share with you my secrets of the pro service toss. Let's dive in. Okay guys, we're talking about some important details about the serve toss, and I think I would like to start by talking about different ways that you can hold the ball. I recommend holding the ball in the fingertips with all the fingers touching the ball. So all 4 fingers and the thumb touching the ball, and that will give you a good control as you release the ball. I also recommend releasing the ball kind of like a flower blossoming. That's an old tennis coaching saying, and I think it's a wise saying. You want to release the ball like a flower opening, and you want to be very careful not to flip the ball. So you don't want to flip your wrist. You don't want to bend your arm too much. We'll talk about that a little bit. But basically, try to hold the ball in their fingertips. There are a few exceptions on the tour, but most pros hold the ball in their fingertips. I think sometimes I hold the ball with 3 and 1, so I use my thumb and my fingertips to hold the ball, but ideally have all the fingers to keep that kinesthetic awareness and to just release the ball out of your fingertips. A lot of people palm the ball, which doesn't give you a great control, and some people roll the ball off their fingertips. So in general, just try to hold the ball in your fingertips, and I'll show you a close-up of that, and I can show you what it looks like. And try to release the ball with your wrist firm. You don't want your wrist to move. You don't want your wrist to flip. That will cause some inconsistency. So you try to keep everything locked here. There are some variations of the toss. Some people toss with like they're holding a glass of water. So that is an interesting variation that I think is an acceptable variation, interesting within the parameters of good technique. So consider that as well, using your tossing the ball to the side. With the hand to the side, the wrist is neutral, but the hand is tilted to the side rather than the palm up. Most people toss with the palm up, but there are some players who successfully toss from the side like this. I have seen another variation, which is very rare, but I have seen it done where I've had players, some top juniors actually, toss with the palm down. And so they release the ball this way, which I guess is an acceptable variation. It's very unusual and very rare, probably more difficult to control. I would recommend to you guys, if you're learning, just try to keep the palm up. I think that's a simple way to toss. Palm up and not too much action with the wrist. So we talked about how to hold the ball in the fingertips, which I think is probably the first step. If you're trying to work in your toss, whether you're advanced or beginner, you want to make sure that you're holding the ball well. You don't want to flip your wrist, and you want to hold the ball in your fingertips. So another really important thing to consider is how are you going to toss that thing up? We can maybe talk about the stance a little bit, but let's just talk about the arms first. Like, what are you going to do with your arms? Well, there's a few different variations. Some people toss with the tossing arm is coming forward, so directly towards the camera here or to the court. And I would consider that 12 o'clock tossing arm location. So you can consider that. But one of the downfalls of that is it's a little harder to get a good hip and shoulder turn for power development. I think acceptable variations are between 12 and 1 and 2 and 3. If we say 3 is about parallel to the baseline, so 3 would look like this. Federer is a good example of that. He tosses parallel to the baseline, or he did when he was playing. He's recently retired. And then you see a number of pros and top players who are kind of in between there. So you have a lot of options here for what you want to do with the angle of your tossing arm. You have 12. A famous player that comes to mind, just Robin Soderling, has a 12 o'clock toss and then coils. Another current top player is Alexander Zverev, who has a very straight-on toss with the left arm, and then he coils. So that's an option. There's an option to toss and then coil your shoulders. And then some players, and many coaches like this, a big controversy in tennis, many coaches like the tossing first, turning first and then tossing. So that can be at the 3 o'clock location here, or it can be at 2:30 or 2 or 1. And so I think in general between 1 and 3 is pretty typical at the high level. With the top juniors that I coach, that's typically where I'd like to see them. This is more rare to toss here at straight ahead, like at 12 o'clock. I think for my own serve, I'm closer to between 2 and 3. So when I toss here, about this angle, and I try not to go past 3. If you go past 3 p.m., I'm gonna have 12, 1, 2, 3 along the baseline here. If you go past 3 p.m., there's a name for that. Mark Kovacs calls it a J toss. I call it a J toss as well. Mark Kovacs is a leading sports scientist who is an expert on tennis mechanics, and he also discourages players from making a J toss. And I agree with Mark that a J toss is not ideal, because when you toss when you make a big J with your toss and you're tossing it at 4 o'clock, or even some players are very extreme at 5 o'clock, the ball will travel very far from right to left. So it's difficult to get an accurate toss location and to hit that ball as it's moving in an arc over your head. But to be honest with you guys, if you look at high-speed video, and the research shows that pretty much everyone's toss fades a little bit from right to left, but it's just a matter of extremes. You don't want to have a huge extreme movement of the ball from right to left. There is also more of a fade from right to left on a kick serve. So when I toss the ball for a kick serve, my ball will travel more right to left than when I toss the ball for my flat serve or my slice serve. So there are some ideas about the arms. This is sort of the start position, and Mark Kovacs's 8-stage model of the serve, this would be sort of the start, and the tossing action is the release. It's stage 1 and 2 of the Kovacs 8-stage model of the serve, which is a great model. If you're interested in biomechanics and if you're interested in understanding the serve, I highly recommend you learn about the 8-stage model of the serve, which is it was original research by Mark Kovacs, who has a PhD in exercise science, and he's was also quite a great player. He was a top college player who won the NCAA doubles. A lot of people don't realize that. So you want to stand sideways, and then you can release the ball 12, 1, 2, 3, but try not to go past 3 and force yourself into a J toss position. So we were talking about the different angles of the tossing arm, and essentially you'd like to, just from a different view here, you have a 12 o'clock tossing arm angle, which is almost straight in. And then you have a lot more, which is pretty rare, and a lot of pros go, 12:30, 1, 2, 3, and these are all within the acceptable range. There's no one right way. You can do it any way you want in the beginning here, as long as you can get that toss in a good spot, and we'll talk about that next. Okay, another important aspect of the toss is, when should you release it? The research shows that the pros release the ball about eye level, between the eyes and the forehead. Mark Kovacs has done a lot of research on this, and the majority of pros, they release right at that moment. So you bring your arm up and you release right about the eye level. Anywhere there's a range of acceptability there between eye level and the top of the head. So if you release too early, if you release down here at shoulder level or below your eyes, the ball usually drifts forward. So you end up sometimes chasing a toss too forward. And if you hold on to the ball too long, the ball usually drifts behind you, and that can be a common problem with people when they're losing consistency on their toss. So you really want to have a good toss, because if you can get that toss in a good spot, it's going to allow you to have that top level serve with great consistency and accuracy. So if Pat Doherty's sometimes known as the serve doctor, although Mark Kovacs is also calls himself the serve doctor, so I'm not sure who the serve doctor really is. When I get my PhD in biomechanics, maybe I can try to stake that claim as the serve doctor or the serve surgeon, or I think Jeff Salzenstein calls himself the serve surgeon. So there's a lot of serve doctors out there, but essentially what you want to do with the toss is get a good release and a good rhythm with your arms, and you want to figure out what angle you want to have for that tossing arm, which we were talking about earlier. What you don't want is like a difference in angle between first and second serves. That's a common area that I see that people make a mistake with. They have maybe a first serve toss here, they'll toss more straight ahead, And then on a second serve, they'll coil and do more of a J toss, maybe to try to get more shoulder coil, to get top spin or a kick. And you really want, for the element of disguise, you want to have the same angle. So whether I'm hitting a first serve or a second serve, I want to be in this, for me, I'm about 230 on my tossing angle. I want to be the same and then adjust my body after I've released the ball. It gives me a little better disguise with the other guy. So the other guy can't see what I'm doing right away. Pat Doherty is definitely an expert on the serve. He's great. He's worked at IMG for a long time, and he's done some great work, has some very interesting ideas and concepts around the serve. And one of the things that I like that Pat says is he says you go from your thigh when you toss, thigh to eye, and then keep going to the sky. And I think that's a really, really good tip, is when you're tossing, you go down to your thigh, and you go up to your eye, and the research does show that you release about eye level. So you go down to your thigh, eye, and then you keep going up with your arm to the sky. I think it's a really great reminder. It's a good rhyme. And it's very common that players, when they release, they will drop their left arm. So the idea is to go all the way up and keep extending your arm up to the sky. Thigh, more or less. You don't have to touch. There's a lot of variations here. Some players will come halfway here. Some players will come all the way down to the thigh. But in general, you want to be kind of in this elevator shaft here. I think that's a really good coaching tip too. It's like you kind of imagine you're in this elevator shaft with your left arm, and you bring your arm down and you keep releasing up. After you release, you keep bringing your arm up and you stretch your armpit. You stretch your lats here, and you stretch all through your tricep and through your obliques. Get this great stretch. I highly recommend when you're tossing, getting that really nice stretch through there. Thigh, come down close to your thigh, and then up to your eye, release at the eye, then continue up to the sky and begin that stretch in this left side of your body. And that stretch is actually going to help you as later on in the motion, as you try to get that important shoulder over shoulder biomechanics. So you might be wondering, well, how high should I toss? Well, there's a lot of different heights that the pros toss. You see some of the biggest servers in the world, like Pericard now, Giovanni, he tosses very low. Nick Kyrgios has a very low toss. Casper Ruud has a very low toss. They hit the ball almost at the apex. In fact, some of the pros can hit the ball at the apex. Most of the research shows the majority of pros, Mark Kovacs has studied this, and he's found that the majority of pros, they let the ball hits the top and starts to come down. There are no pros that I know of that hit the ball on the way up. There are some pros who come close to hitting the ball at the apex, like Pericard's one, the big serving young Frenchman. And then if you see some other big servers like Isner or Opelka, Opelka just had a great tournament at Brisbane, and they let the ball come down. So I would recommend for most of you, just if you're thinking about, okay, how should I do it? I would try to toss up high and let the ball go up to the apex, and then as it starts to come down, you're going to hit it probably within 12 inches of the apex. So as the ball's coming down, you wouldn't want to let it drop much more than that, and that's a pretty reasonable toss. But everyone's going to have a different toss height because it depends on your rhythm. Players who have longer motions down here, they tend to have higher tosses. Players with the deep knee bend who sometimes get stuck down here, they tend to have higher tosses. And players who have quick actions, if they have abbreviated actions here or they bring their racket straight up, they tend to have lower tosses, and they tend to hit the ball at the apex or as the ball just comes down from the apex, just a few inches below the apex. That being said, I have a methodology for when I teach the serve. I love teaching the serve. I believe that I can teach a beautiful world-class serve to just about anybody. And I have players visiting here from all over the world just to learn to serve with me, and I'm proud of that. One of the things that I do, especially with people who are in the beginning stages, is I have them toss very high, which is not traditional, which is a bit out of the ordinary. The reason is I want players to toss very high so that they can learn the mechanics of loading, and they have time to organize their body, load, find the correct power position, and they have time to explode. For me, that's paramount when I'm teaching the serve. is that power position, which is stage 3 of the Kovacs model, of the 8-stage model of the serve. And so I really think that that's really critical. And so if you're working on your serve and you're having trouble hitting some of the checkpoints, I would recommend to you, try to toss the ball higher. In fact, you could toss it 12 to 18 inches higher than it really should be down the road. So you toss it very high. And that will give you time to organize some of this stuff down here. And then after you've organized and locked in some of the biomechanics of your power position, your loading, that's stage 3, you can then, the toss will naturally start to get a little lower, and you can start to develop that Kyrgios action if you'd like that quick motion or that paracard motion, or, you know, the great server Ivanisevic from the 90s, you know, one of my favorite servers. He had a very low toss. Pete Sampras had a relatively medium-high toss and let the ball come down. So it really does vary on the style and the player. I don't think there's any one exact way, but you want to make sure that you have enough time to load and get a good power position, and which is, in my experience, most people struggle with so much. So I recommend, in my personal teaching, if you were to train with me, I would recommend tossing high, really giving you time to establish your load, and then over time you can start to bring that toss down, and you can work on a quick action for surprise if that's the style that you like. So a really common question is, okay, should I toss to 1 o'clock? Should I toss to 12 o'clock or 11 o'clock? Well, in general, you want to toss to about between 12 and 1. There's a range of acceptability here. So generally I measure that from the head. So if looking from behind, you see the head level of the player, and just to the right of the head would be between 12:30 and 1 o'clock. So the ideal, and ideally the pros are a little more sideways here, but ideally you're hitting the ball between 12:30 and 1, or 12 and 1 on most serves for a flat or a slice serve. And for a kick serve, I like to push the toss a little more to the left of the head, which would be closer to 11. So back here, 11 for the kick. And the way that I teach it is between 12 and 1 for the power serve and for the slice serve. So we have 12 would be here straight up ahead, and I like between 12 and 1 for the power and the slice. The toss should be exactly the same for the slice and the flat. So you have optimal disguise there. If I'm going to hit a serve here, that toss right there is probably around 1, and I'm going to be able to hit a slice. I need to be able to hit a slice and the flat serve off that same toss. The kick toss that's a big debate. I think there's a big myth that the pros toss in the same spot. They don't. They always toss differently for a kick serve or a topspin serve. So from the returner's perspective, you can't really tell because of the depth perception issue. Is the player over there can't tell if I toss closer to me. He can only really see left and right, although he may see what my body does in relationship to the toss, whether it's closer or farther away. But you generally can have maximum disguise if you toss, let's say at 12:30 here, and I can bring it a little more back, this closer to me, closer to the baseline, to get more topspin on it, or I can toss it more forward to hit it with more power. So that would be the one theory of tossing, is where you toss it basically in the same spot left and right. It's not the same spot forward and back, but it's the same spot left and right, and then you can sort of adjust your body underneath it to hit different types of serves. And the opponent on the other side will not be able to really see any difference. From the returner's perspective, it'll just look like the toss is, 12 or 12:30. So a very different type of philosophy is what I'm sort of suggesting, and the way I teach it, I just think it's much easier. So when you're working on a kick, you have a very different toss location, really a bunch more to the left, between 11, 11:30, and it's very distinctly different than your first serve and your power serve, slice serve toss, which would be between 12 and 1. I find that's the easiest way for me to teach it. Just over the years, trying to get a young player or a beginner or an adult who's learning to try to have the same toss is very, very difficult. It's so hard to learn the serve and all 3 serves. So I recommend for you guys, much easier to have this split in the tosses. You have toss to the right, between 12 and 1 for the slice and the flat serve, that should be exactly the same. So that's not a myth. Same, and then you have a toss to the left for your kicker. And then over time, if you become a really high-level player and you want to go with that other philosophy and merge the tosses, you could totally do that. You know, it's not a big deal. You could totally merge the tosses if that's what you prefer. You're just going to lose some kick action. If you toss here, you're going to lose some kick action versus tossing back here. So I'm of the philosophy where I don't mind the player. The player usually knows that I'm going to hit a kick, and I could always toss to my left and kick it out wide. I could still surprise the guy with my kick, but most of the time the guy's going to know I'm hitting a kick. And I want for my players to have the maximum side spin and twist on their kick versus the idea of having the toss in the same spot. Most of the pros that I see who keep that toss in the same spot, remember, it's never exactly the same because in terms of forward and back, it's always closer. Those players tend to have more slice on their kick. They don't have quite as much action on their kick. And the players who go for it and toss to 11 or 11:30, players who toss back in this range, they tend to have a lot more action on their kick. They give up a little bit of disguise, but they get more action. So if you're a high-level player, you're going to have to weigh those two opinions and determine what's best for you. And if you're a lower-level player, I think don't even worry about disguise yet. Start with just learning a good slice, good flat off the same toss, and then learn a kick, which is like incredibly hard to learn as it is. You don't need to build in disguise early on, in the same way that you don't have to build in a low toss early on, and you can do that later on in the development cycle. So of course, everybody wants to know, how far should I toss inside the court? Well, I was explaining that on a first serve, the toss is always farther forward. So the toss is never in the same spot for a first serve and the second serve. You hear that myth a lot. The pros always have the toss closer to them on a second serve for spin than they do on a first serve, unless you're like Giovanni Pericard and you're serving 140-mile-per-hour second serves. And some guys are doing that now. Kyrgios does that sometimes, and that's becoming a common strategy on the tour where the players are hitting 2 first serves. So aside from that strategy where you're hitting 2 first serves, your first serve toss is going to be well into the court. You know, for me, I'm 6'3", and that toss that I just did felt pretty good, and I was almost 3 feet inside the court, probably a little more when I'm all juiced up and I'm ready to go. I may even toss 3 or 4 feet into the court. John Isner tosses much more than that, bigger guy than me. So there's a lot of variation, but in general, I would say the first serve toss is going to be pretty far in the court. Depends on your height. Also depends on your vertical leap. Depends on how springy you are with the legs, how much fast twitch fibers you have, how high you can get up there. But you want to get that toss high and in front so you can get a maximum explosion with your legs. There's some interesting research by Mark Kovacs pointing this out, that there has been a research study of professional players showing that their toss is almost never in exactly the same place. So most people say, oh, the pros, they're so perfect with their toss, they always have it in the same spot. And there is a well-done study that shows, and according to Kovacs, he cited it, and he said that the toss varied like in a box, like I think he said about 10 to 12 centimeters, which is pretty significant range of toss location. And so within this box, the pros are able to put their toss, and they're actually making, I mean, it's pretty remarkable that the pros are not putting the ball in exactly the same spot, but more like in a box. And so you can think about your toss that way, is you like to get your serve in the right neighborhood, but it's not going to be the exact address every time. So if your toss isn't 100% perfect, you shouldn't panic. You should be able to make some adjustments. The pros are always making those adjustments with their wrist, depending on where the ball is within that box. So the ball has to be up there in the right neighborhood, but it's not going to be, like, I think in my mind, before knowing about that research study, I just felt like probably the best players in the world, they're putting it precisely in exactly the same location, like GPS navigation, like with the GPS accuracy, but it's actually, that doesn't seem to be the case. So just try to get your serve up there in a good spot within a framework there that you can adjust with your wrist to do what you want with the ball. But it does need to be in front. The second serve toss, like when I do a kick serve, it's going to be much closer to the baseline. Probably shouldn't be on the baseline, probably I would say a foot inside the court, and that's going to allow me to get under the ball. It allows players to get under the ball if I'm doing a kick serve. Let's see, that one was on the baseline, but as I get fired up, I'm going to try to jump into the court more. And I'm sure my toss is going to start going forward a little bit. But even there, see, that was maybe a foot or less inside the baseline. So on a kick serve or a second serve slice that has more topspin, the toss is going to be a lot closer because you have to get under the ball with your body. On a first serve, it's not the case. On a first serve, a big power serve, you want to get that toss way into the court so you can hit through the back of the ball more, and you don't need your body as far underneath the ball. That being said, and I don't think there's any research on this subject, but there are many different styles that the pros use. If you see like a guy like Federer, really didn't get much into the court. His toss was much closer to the baseline, probably something like that, than a lot of pros. And he's like very super cash, and he had a great serve. He kind of, he definitely used his legs, but he went more vertically up, and a lot of times he would land right on top of the baseline. And I always felt that was kind of odd for such an amazing world-class player that he didn't jump that far into the court. And then there are many like great servers who clearly toss way more into the court, like I was mentioning, like an Isner, or look at like Ben Shelton, or look at some of these really explosive guys who toss the ball 2, 3, 4 feet or more into the court, and they have this huge explosion up and in, and a lot of those guys are landing way more than Federer did into the court. And I can give you like dozens of examples of different guys, and I'm always interested in how much they get up and off the ground. Sometimes they don't get much off the ground when they're just sort of being super cash and they're just warming up. You'll see they won't jump very much. And then deeper into a match, when they're all fired up, you'll see like huge explosion up and in. And a lot of guys getting 2, 3 feet into the court with with their left foot if they're a right-handed player, which is, I mean, unbelievable. And some guys, another interesting thing that we probably need more research on, I don't believe there's any study on this, is how high pros are jumping. And you see some guys, you probably assume that most of the top guys have an incredible vertical, and some guys are getting, almost a foot off the ground, like an Andy Roddick style explosion from the legs. And other guys are just kind of chill, and they're not really maximizing that vertical leap. And then remember, the serve is a plyometric. I mean, the serve is a great example of using the stretch shortening cycle, pushing to the ground, stretching the tendon and musculotendinous unit there, and getting explosion upward is basically a vertical leap that you do over and over and over again. But it seems like some guys are more chill about that, and they don't really like try to maximize that with every serve, and maybe that helps them over a long course of a match, like a Federer, like they don't wear out their legs. And then other guys are like really trying to reach maximum height and try to get more angle down into the court. So that's probably interesting philosophical debate too. Like, should you try to max out your vertical leap, get as high as you can, max power, max vertical leap, max angle down to the court? Or should you try to conserve some of your energy? Because as we know, doing a lot of plyometrics can tire you out. Imagine over a long 5-set match. Should you maybe do a little less? Like, think of like a Stan Wawrinka serve, which is kind of minimalist. And would that be better over the long run, maybe to save some energy? That's an interesting debate. So if you're working on your toss, I think really the best thing to work in your toss is focused serving. I'm not a big fan of doing separate tossing exercises. There's lots of ideas. You can definitely explore some if you like to practice your toss just at home. There are some little tricks you can do, like you can set up a waste paper basket or a box, or you can draw out with chalk a square. But I think the bottom line, if you're going to practice your serve toss, do it with the racket and do it with the full motion. Really go through the motion like that. You don't have to hit the ball, but if you're practicing on your own at home, or if it's something you really like to work on, I mean, I'm not opposed to that, but I just think the best way to work in your toss is just to go out there and actually serve. Like, you can do some practice with the racket. This is what I do with all my players. I have them do a lot of shadow work like this with the racket. There's a very interesting study by Makar Reed, who's a great sports science tennis researcher from Australia, where they studied a lot of players who practice their serve toss, and they studied how players practice their serve toss without the racket. That's a common coaching practice where you just toss. And what they found was that's not a great way to practice your serve toss, because it didn't correlate well with the actual height when the players had their racket and they actually served. the height was totally different. Like it varied like up to like 12 inches, I think. I have to check the study. I can reference the study for you guys if you're interested, but it's kind of an interesting study. I mean, I'd like to see maybe some higher level studies of more interesting biomechanics of the serve, like I was saying, rather than just the toss. But they did a study on the toss, and they found that just tossing, like a lot of people just go like this, you know, it's not a great way to practice your toss because the toss height is way different than when you do the full motion with the racket. So it doesn't transfer very well. That was sort of the gist of the research. So, you know, they did a study on that, and what does that tell you? I think you just shouldn't be practicing much without serving anyway. The best way to practice your toss is work on your serve. You know, have some focused targets and work on your toss that way. And if you do need to do some shadow work, always do it with the racket and try to really visualize well. Like if you're doing the shadow tossing, visualize well, maybe go through your ritual, you know, and visualize what you're trying to do here and do everything with the racket, full rhythm, and make it as realistic as possible if you're practicing your toss. And what Makar Reed and associates, what they found was, it's really not helpful to stand here and do like, this is not a good use of your time. I guess we needed a research study to prove that, but I personally did not need a research study I never had my students do it. Always had them do the entire thing to keep it more real, but apparently a lot of coaches for many generations have just had people do this a lot, you know, put the racket down there and try to hit the racket face, you know. So that's not a very good drill, according to the research, the limited, thin research that we have on the tennis serve in the literature. So if you really want to practice your serve toss, I recommend using a bucket or a basket. I wouldn't spend too much, remember, don't do it like that, according to the research, don't just do it like that. I thought that was pretty good. But try to do it together with the arm action. So if you're at home, or that's legitimate. If you don't have a court to get to and you just want to practice your motion and really myelinate that movement, get your left arm more coordinated and stronger, that could be worthwhile. I would recommend setting up a basket or a bucket. I have this convenient bucket here, but do the entire motion. Really get into it like that. Really get into the motion and you can set up different toss locations with the bucket. I've done this with players, and this can be really good. You can get a lot of reps here. Maybe you don't have access to a court. That makes sense. You can practice your toss this way. Really get into it. Visualize, pretend maybe you're playing a match here, and really get into the toss movement. Yes. So another super cool trick that I've never seen anywhere else, but I do all the time. I don't know when I started doing it, but I get like a mat from Home Depot. It's called an anti-fatigue mat, which I also like using when I'm teaching a lot on hard court. It's good for my body. But what I do is I put the mat down, and make sure you have a mat that sticks and it's not slippery. And you can put the mat in different locations, and you can kind of set up little targets on the mat. It's also a great way to work on your explosion. Like you can work on your leg drive and explosion up and into the court. That's another thing you can do. But you can basically practice your toss using the mat as a guidance for your toss. So if I want to toss, sometimes I put little throw down lines here, or I use chalk to make different diagrams. And you can use the mat as a guideline, as a target for your toss to see if you're getting the toss out in the right spot. You can hit the mat, and there's different sizes of mats you can get, but it's just a great simple way to work on the serve toss. Remember, always use the full motion. Always use the full motion through the action. Don't just toss with your left arm. Always work on your rhythm and use the racket when you're tossing, and you can practice your toss that way. I think it's a really simple way to work on it, and it works well with combined with that basket drill, that bucket drill we were doing earlier. Guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video on the serve toss. You enjoyed some of the nuances that I went over and some of the secrets of what the pros do with their serve toss. There's a lot of complexity there, even though this is only stage 1 and stage 2, the start and release of the serve. A lot of it's style, but I think there are some important elements during those initial stages of the serve that are very critical for serve performance later on. And as we know, the more consistent your toss is, that's going to help you serve a lot better. So guys, I'll see you on the next program.